In the vast expanse of the galactic core, where civilizations from hundreds of worlds converged, stood the imposing structure known as the Interstellar Concordance Center. Within its gleaming halls, representatives from the galaxy's most formidable species gathered to maintain peace among beings who might otherwise view each other as prey or predator. This was the domain of the Deathworld Alliance, an exclusive council composed only of species that had evolved on planets so hostile that survival itself was an achievement. Zephyr, a diminutive being with pointed ears and slender frame, often found himself looking up to his companions, quite literally. As a representative of the Sylvans, a species known for their strategic minds rather than physical prowess, he was accustomed to being the smallest person in any room. Today was no exception as he navigated the bustling food court with two of his closest allies. "Have you noticed the human?" Zephyr asked, tilting his head toward a corner table where a solitary figure sat engaged in what appeared to be a peculiar ritual. His companions stopped in their tracks. Kale, the towering representative of the Vexians, stood at least 8 feet tall with iridescent scales covering his muscular frame and a tail tipped with what looked like a natural blade. His multiple eyelids blinked in succession as he focused on the human. Beside him, Torvin of the Zoraxians shifted uncomfortably. With his elongated cranial structure and 12 eyes arranged in a complex pattern across his head, Torvin was an intimidating sight to most species. Yet something about the human's meal seemed to disturb even this seasoned diplomat. "What is he doing?" Torvin's voice was low, carrying a note of unease that Zephyr rarely heard from his usually confident friend. The human sat alone, methodically arranging various items on his tray with an almost artistic precision. He would select different pieces of what appeared to be meat, dip them into a deep red liquid, and consume them with an expression of profound satisfaction. The arrangement was deliberate, creating patterns that seemed to follow some cultural significance the aliens couldn't decipher. "I've observed many feeding rituals across the galaxy," Zephyr said, his large almond-shaped eyes narrowing with curiosity. "But this seems different. Almost ceremonial." Kale rumbled with amusement, his deep voice resonating through the food court. "Only one way to find out what's so fascinating about human cuisine." He gestured with one massive hand toward the table. "We could ask." Zephyr shot him a skeptical look. "Just walk up and inquire about his meal? What if it's some sacred ceremony? Or worse, what if it's something offensive to interrupt?" "We're Deathworlders," Kale countered with a note of pride. "This isn't the broader galactic assembly with those delicate species who faint at the sight of blood. We've all consumed things that would give most sentient beings nightmares." Torvin's auxiliary eyes swiveled to focus on Zephyr, creating a disconcerting effect like being studied by a cluster of living jewels. The red substance, its viscosity and color resemble Zorasian blood. The implications are concerning. Zephyr considered the situation. The Deathworlder Alliance prided itself on being composed of species from the galaxy's most hostile planets. Beings who had developed immunities, strengths, and appetites that seemed supernatural to softer species. If anyone could handle witnessing whatever bizarre meal the human was consuming, it should be them. "The human ambassador only joined the council a week ago," Zephyr noted. "This is exactly the kind of cultural exchange we're supposed to be facilitating." Kale grinned, showing rows of sharp teeth. "What's the worst that could happen? We're in the most secure facility in the sector. Security monitors every square meter." With a collective nod, the three began their approach, weaving between tables occupied by various Deathworlder species. A pair of armored Krillians watched them pass with interest. A lone phantom warrior, all 8 feet of shadow and muscle, observed them before returning to its meal. As they drew closer to the human's table, Zephyr felt a moment of shared uncertainty. Despite all their bravado, none of them had interacted extensively with this new species called humans. They'd read the briefing documents, of course, basic physiology, atmospheric requirements, dietary needs. But understanding humans came from a Class 13 Deathworld, and comprehending their social customs were entirely different matters. The human had just selected another piece of meat when Zephyr made his decision. Despite being the smallest, he found himself taking the initiative. "Excuse me," Zephyr said, keeping his voice respectful and clear. Are you the human ambassador? The human looked up, and Zephyr got his first close look at those forward-facing predator eyes. They were brown, warm, and held a spark of amusement. The human appeared young by the standards described in the briefing documents, with dark hair and a build that suggested both strength and agility, the kind of physique that came from a world that constantly tested its inhabitants. Yes, I'm Ambassador Ethan Reyes, the human said, his voice deeper than Zephyr had expected. Can I help you? Before Zephyr could respond, Kale and Torvin positioned themselves on either side of him, creating a small delegation before the human's table. We were curious about your meal, Kale announced with his typical directness. Decided to come ask what it is. Hope that's not rude in your culture. Torvin spoke up, his voice tight. I know it's common for various species to demonstrate their strength by consuming the most formidable predator from their homeworld. Is that what you're doing? Zephyr blinked in surprise. He had never heard of this challenge before. Being small often excluded him from the dominance displays common among Deathworlders. The human's reaction was unexpected. He threw back his head and laughed, a warm, genuine sound that filled the immediate area. Several nearby diners glanced over with interest. Something like that, Ethan said, still chuckling. At least, that's how it started. Zephyr frowned, not understanding. He stared at the food again, trying to make sense of the arrangement. That's when he noticed it. The pattern wasn't random at all. The small cuts of meat had been carefully arranged to form something resembling a smiling human face, complete with 2 pieces positioned as eyes, several more creating a nose, and the red substance from the bottle forming a curved smile where the human would dip the pieces before eating them. What do you mean by something like that? Zephyr asked, unable to keep the curiosity from his voice. The human smile widened. Well, I was challenged a few days ago by a representative, can't recall the species name, to eat the biggest predator from my world. He was confident I couldn't handle it, that humans were probably soft despite coming from a Class 13 Deathworld. Ethan's expression shifted to something that looked like mischievous pride. So I decided to surprise him and win some easy credits. He lifted his tray with both hands, angling it so Zephyr, Kale, and Torvin could see all the details. The arrangement was even more intricate up close, with careful attention paid to color gradients and textural contrasts. This, Ethan announced with obvious pride, was made with a custom code for the food synthesizer that my technical friend created for me. It's actually a smiling face, you see? Made with pieces of meat from every single Deathworld in the galaxy. Zephyr felt his blood run cold. Every single Deathworld? That was impossible. There were hundreds of classified Deathworlds in the known galaxy, planets so hostile that even brief visits required extensive protective equipment. The predators from these worlds were the stuff of nightmares, creatures that could tear through starship hulls or survive in vacuum. But the human wasn't finished. His excitement was building as he began pointing to individual pieces with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a particularly interesting hobby. This piece here, Ethan indicated a pale, almost luminescent chunk, is from a glacier stalker from Frostfall 9. You know those massive apex predators that hunt in temperatures that would freeze most species solid? The meat has this interesting crystalline structure that stays cold even after synthesis. Creates a really nice contrast with the warmer pieces. He moved his finger to a deep purple morsel. This one's from a shadow hunter on Umbrax 4. You know those worlds with the 40-hour nights? These predators evolved to hunt in complete darkness, and their flesh has these bioluminescent properties. Doesn't do much after it's synthesized, but the flavor is incredible, kind of sweet with a metallic finish. The human continued his explanation, growing more animated with each piece. The red marbled one is from a magma serpent on Volcanus 12. Yes, an actual volcanic planet with actual lava-swimming predators. Oh, and this little beauty, he tapped a piece that seemed to shift colors in the light, is from a phased predator on Zethros 3. Have you heard of those? Zephyr stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. This human had created a meal consisting of the most dangerous predators from across the entire galactic Deathworld registry. Not just from Earth, his own homeworld, but from every hostile environment known to spacefaring civilization. It was an act of such spectacular audacity that Zephyr couldn't decide whether to be impressed or horrified. Beside him, he could sense Torvin's growing distress. All 12 of the Zoraxians' eyes were wide, several beginning to rotate in different directions, a clear sign of extreme agitation in his species. Kale had gone very still, his usual boisterous energy replaced by a tension that suggested he was reassessing every assumption he'd made about this encounter. The human, oblivious to the rising panic in his audience, continued enthusiastically. The mixture turned out incredible, honestly way better than I expected. Each piece has its own unique flavor profile, but when you combine them, there's this synergy that happens. He paused, reaching for the bottle of red liquid, and Zephyr felt his stomach clench. And the bottle with the red substance? No, 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 Torvin said, his voice rising with each repetition. I'm out of here. The tall Zoracian turned on his heel and fled. There was no other word for it. Torvin, leader of the Zoracian delegation to the Deathworlder Alliance, veteran of a dozen diplomatic incidents, survivor of 3 assassination attempts, ran away from a table in the food court like he was being chased by a fleet of warships. Nope. Absolutely not, Kale added, his own voice carrying a note of genuine fear that Zephyr had never heard from the usually fearless Vexian. This is too much. Way too much. And then Kale was running too, his heavy footfalls making the floor vibrate slightly as he hurried after Torvin. The two of them stood out dramatically from the crowd, their size making their panicked retreat visible from anywhere in the food court. Several other diners had turned to watch, clearly wondering what could have possibly scared 2 of the council's most prominent members. Zephyr found himself standing alone before the humans' table, frozen in a mixture of shock and bizarre pride. Despite feeling utter revulsion at the food horror array before him, he had somehow, for once in his life, proven more resistant than his taller friends. The red sauce, Zephyr managed, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to sound calm. He stared into the human's eyes, which now reflected confusion and concern. What is it? The human blinked, glancing in the direction that Torvin and Kale had fled. Then back to Zephyr. A smile slowly spread across his face, and then he was laughing again, not the polite chuckle from before, but genuine, body-shaking laughter that suggested he'd just understood something hilarious. The red bottle, he managed between laughs, that's just ketchup, my friend. It's made from a red fruit from Earth, tomatoes. It's sweet, a little tangy, and tastes absolutely amazing with just about anything. No blood, no predator extract, nothing scary. Just ketchup. Ketchup? Zephyr repeated slowly, testing the word. A red fruit sauce? Yep. Probably the most common condiment on Earth. We put it on everything. Well, I specifically do. It's basically the opposite of scary. The human picked up the bottle and showed Zephyr the label, which featured a cheerful illustration of the aforementioned tomatoes. Zephyr felt laughter bubbling up inside him despite the disturbed feeling that still churned in his gut at the sight of all those meats organized in the shape of a human smiling face. It was absurd. The whole situation was absurd. Here he was, a tiny sentient who had just watched 2 of the toughest beings he knew run screaming from artificial meat and a condiment made of fruit. I suppose I should introduce myself properly since my friends seem to have abandoned me, Zephyr said, letting a small laugh escape. I'm Zephyr of the Sylvan delegation. Ethan Reyes, the human replied, extending his hand in what Zephyr recognized from the briefing documents as a greeting gesture. Nice to meet you, Zephyr. Your friends okay? They took off pretty fast. They'll be fine, Zephyr assured him, though he was already dreading the conversation he'd have to have with them later. I think they just weren't prepared for the scope of your meal. It's quite an impressive display. Thanks, Ethan's enthusiasm returned immediately. Took us 3 tries to get the synthesizer code right. The first attempt turned everything into a kind of homogeneous paste. Tasted okay, but totally defeated the purpose. The second try got the flavors right, but the textures were all wrong. But this third version, perfect. Zephyr found himself genuinely curious despite his lingering unease. Can I ask you something? How is it possible that you're able to eat all of those things? I mean, I understand humans come from a death world, but consuming the apex predators from hundreds of other death worlds simultaneously seems extreme. Don't the different biochemistries cause problems? Ethan leaned back in his chair, that mischievous smile returning. Well, here's the thing about humans. We're true generalists about a lot of things. Our digestive systems evolved to handle just about anything organic. We've got this incredibly versatile metabolism that can break down and process a huge range of compounds. He shrugged. Obviously, there are limits. We can't eat radioactive materials, for example. But in terms of organic flesh from other species, usually not a problem. Usually? Zephyr echoed. Pretty much never a problem as long as it's actual food and not toxic waste. Honestly, we usually only avoid eating things we find cute, and even that's more of a cultural choice than a biological limitation. We can eat them. We just don't want to. Zephyr felt his analytical mind engaging with this information. That's fascinating from an evolutionary standpoint. What kind of planet would require such broad dietary adaptation? Ethan laughed, but this time it had an odd quality to it, like he was laughing at a private joke. Nah, it's just Earth. Very good planet, very tame. Nothing scary there at all. Zephyr looked at the human with undisguised distrust. Ethan's expression was so clearly disingenuous that even someone unfamiliar with human facial expressions could tell he was being less than truthful. You're joking, Zephyr said flatly. Maybe a little, Ethan admitted with a wink. Earth's not that bad. Sure, we've got creatures that can kill you in hundreds of different ways, but hey, at least we don't have phase predators. This is the first time I'm talking with a human, Zephyr said, deciding to change the subject before Ethan could elaborate on Earth's apparently numerous death scenarios. Is there anything more I should know about humans being generalists? Ethan paused in the middle of reaching for another piece of meat, his expression turning thoughtful. I don't know if this is very important, but we're very generalist when it comes to choosing our companions, too. Companions? Zephyr wasn't familiar with the term. Animals we keep for companionship, Ethan explained. He pulled out his mobile device again, swiping through it. Here, let me show you. The screen filled with images that made Zephyr's eyes widen. Humans, lots of humans, with creatures of various sizes and dispositions. Some of the animals were small and fluffy, looking harmless enough, but others were decidedly not. That's a greater direwolf, Ethan said, pointing to an image of a human child standing next to what looked like a massive wolf with glowing eyes. He swiped again. These are from off-world, though, got more interesting once we joined the galactic community. See this? The image showed a human woman standing next to what Zephyr recognized with shock as a juvenile Vexian ravager, a creature known for its aggressive territorial behavior and armored hide that could deflect plasma fire. That's... Zephyr couldn't find the words. Oh, she's a sweetheart, Ethan said warmly. That's Ambassador Thompson's companion, actually named Fluffy. Apparently, ravagers are really social if you raise them from hatching. Who knew? He continued swiping, and Zephyr watched in growing astonishment as image after image appeared. Humans with Zorasian shadow beasts, creatures that should by all rights see humans as food. Humans with Krellian ice serpents floating beside them like living scarves. A particularly shocking image showed a human man in what looked like an embrace with some kind of crystalline entity that Zephyr didn't recognize. We're very, very, very adaptable, Ethan continued, his enthusiasm building as he shared his species' achievements. Once we figured out that most dangerous species are just misunderstood or need the right approach, it became kind of a hobby. If not friend, then why friend-shaped, we say. And here's the real kicker, everything is friend-shaped. The explanation continued for several more minutes with Ethan pulling up articles, videos, and forum posts about humans successfully bonding with creatures from across the galaxy. Zephyr noticed they were beginning to attract a small crowd. Other Deathworlders who had overheard Ethan speaking had drifted closer, their curiosity piqued. A Vexian warrior he'd noticed earlier was now standing just a few feet away, her scaled head tilted with interest. 2 Krellians had paused their meal to listen. Even a normally solitary phantom from the Shadow Worlds had emerged from its preferred dark corner to observe the discussion. Not picky about exotic food, Zephyr said slowly, processing everything he'd learned. Not picky about exotic companions. He paused, a thought occurring to him that seemed almost too broad to be true. Humans must be the most adaptable species I've ever encountered. Ethan's expression shifted to something that Zephyr was beginning to recognize. It was the look that said, "I have another thing I want to show you," which was perhaps the only human expression he could reliably interpret so far. Given how the previous revelations had gone, Zephyr felt a spike of apprehension. "Well," Ethan said, his grin widening, "since you mention it." He tapped at his mobile device again, and Zephyr watched as a new series of images appeared. These showed humans, both males and females, based on the physical differences Zephyr had learned from the briefing documents, and what looked very much like romantic relationships with Deathworlders of various species Zephyr recognized. There was a human woman with her arm around a male Zorasian, both smiling at the camera. A human man holding hands with what appeared to be a Sylvan scout, one of Zephyr's own species, though the individual wasn't anyone he knew personally. Multiple images of human Vexian couples, human Krellian partnerships, even a few photographs of what the captions claimed were human phantom bonds, though how that worked given phantom biology was beyond Zephyr's comprehension. "Yeah," Ethan said, his smile so wide it must have hurt. "We're not choosy at all." The gathered crowd had grown larger, and Zephyr could hear the murmurs of surprise, confusion, and in some cases, what sounded like interest from the various species represented. The implications were staggering. If humans were truly as generalist as Ethan suggested, in diet, in companionship, in romantic partnerships, they represented something new in the galactic community. Ethan glanced at a timepiece on his wrist and let out a small sound of surprise. "Oh, I didn't realize how late it was getting. I've got a meeting with the Cultural Exchange Committee in 20 minutes. He stood, his height becoming apparent as he rose to his full stature. Zephyr had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. Ethan gathered his mobile device and began the process of cleaning up his meal, carefully returning the tray to the food court's recycling station. When he returned, he held out his hand to Zephyr in that same gesture from earlier. "This is called a handshake," Ethan explained, noticing Zephyr's momentary hesitation. "It's a human greeting and a sign of friendship. You grasp my hand, yeah, like that. And we move them up and down a few times. There you go. Perfect." The contact was warm, firm but not crushing, and oddly reassuring. Zephyr found himself appreciating the directness of the gesture. There was no ambiguity in a handshake, no way to misinterpret the intent. "I would love to have a little brave friend like you, Zephyr," Ethan said sincerely. "Your friends took off, but you stuck around, even though I could tell that meal was freaking you out. That takes guts. If you ever want to grab lunch again, maybe something less intimidating next time, just let me know. I'm usually in the council building most days." "I'd like that," Zephyr found himself saying, and was surprised to realize he meant it. "Though perhaps next time you could warn me if you're planning to eat something that represents the collective nightmares of the galaxy." Ethan laughed that warm, genuine laugh again. "Deal. Next time I'll stick to something boring. Maybe just Earth food." As Ethan walked away, weaving through the now dispersing crowd with casual waves and friendly nods to those he passed, Zephyr stood alone at the table and contemplated what had just happened. The being who had inadvertently scared away his 2 closest friends, leaders of their respective councils, warriors and survivors of worlds that would kill most sentients within minutes, had turned out to be quite friendly, enthusiastic even. There was something almost innocent about Ethan's excitement in sharing his species' achievements, like a child showing off a collection of interesting rocks. But Zephyr was also acutely aware that he now had a challenging journey ahead of him. He would need to find Kale and Torvin, probably hiding somewhere in the council building, nursing their wounded pride and possibly their wounded stomachs from the stress, and somehow convince them to give Ethan another chance. It wouldn't be an easy conversation. Torvin would need significant convincing to return to a location where someone had casually consumed flesh of every apex predator in known space. Kale would probably make jokes to cover his embarrassment, then avoid the topic entirely for several days. But Zephyr had a feeling it would be worth the effort. The Deathworlder Alliance existed to foster understanding between species too dangerous for regular galactic society. And if today had taught him anything, it was that humans might be the most dangerous of all, not because of their physical capabilities or their tolerance for extreme foods, but because of their seemingly infinite capacity to adapt, to bond, to find common ground with anything and anyone. As Zephyr made his way toward the exit of the food court, he passed the tables where Ethan had been sitting. Someone had already claimed and reset it, but Zephyr paused for a moment, remembering the sight of that carefully arranged tray with its smiling face made of cosmic nightmare fuel, garnished with what turned out to be fruit sauce. He laughed quietly to himself. In a galaxy full of wonders and terrors, leave it to humans to create something that was somehow both at once. Tomorrow he would track down his friends and begin the process of reintroduction. This time, preferably without anyone running away in fear. The next morning, Zephyr found Kale and Torvin in the Vexian delegation's private lounge, a space designed to accommodate the massive frames of the reptilian warriors. Kale was pacing back and forth, his tail twitching irritably, while Torvin sat perfectly still, all 12 of his eyes closed in what appeared to be deep meditation. "I thought I might find you here," Zephyr said as he entered the room. Kale stopped pacing and turned to face him. "Don't start. I've been up half the night reviewing every piece of intelligence we have on humans. There's nothing in any report that suggests they could consume that." Torvin opened his eyes, slowly, one set at a time. The nutritional composition alone should have been toxic. The combination of proteins from incompatible biologies, it defies everything we know about interspecies consumption. Yet he seemed perfectly fine, Zephyr pointed out. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying it. Kale shuddered, a ripple running through his scaled body. "Did you see the way he dipped the phase predator meat in that red substance? And the smile on his face? I've seen that expression before, on predators right before they strike." "It was ketchup," Zephyr said, trying to keep the amusement from his voice. "Made from tomatoes, a fruit from Earth." Both of his friends stared at him. "A fruit?" Torvin asked, his auxiliary eyes rotating in confusion. "It had the viscosity and coloration of blood." "I know," Zephyr said. "That's why I stayed to ask." And Ethan, that's the ambassador's name, found our terror quite amusing. Kale resumed his pacing. "This changes everything. If humans can safely consume synthesized versions of every apex predator in the known galaxy, what does that say about their biology? Their capabilities? It says they're remarkably adaptable," Zephyr offered. "Which seems to be a defining characteristic of their species." He proceeded to tell them about the rest of his conversation with Ethan, the humans' ability to bond with dangerous creatures, their apparent willingness to form relationships with any species, their generalist approach to life. When he finished, there was a long silence. "They're either insane," Kale finally said, "or they're the most dangerous species in the galaxy." "Or both," Torvin added quietly. "We should request a full briefing from the human delegation. Complete transparency about their biological capabilities. And risk them realizing how much they intimidate us." Kale countered. "No. We need to observe them more carefully. Gather intelligence without revealing our hand." Zephyr sighed. "Or we could just talk to them. That's what the Alliance is for, remember? Cultural exchange and understanding." His friends exchanged a look that clearly communicated their opinion of that approach. "I've scheduled a meeting with Ethan this afternoon," Zephyr said casually. "In the public gardens. He promised to bring Earth food that isn't made from the synthesized flesh of cosmic horrors." Kale stopped pacing again. "You're going back? After what happened yesterday?" "I am," Zephyr confirmed. And I think you both should come with me. Torvin's eyes swiveled to focus on Zephyr. That would be unwise. My dignity is still recovering from yesterday's retreat. Then consider it an intelligence-gathering mission, Zephyr suggested. We need to understand humans better if we're going to work with them on the council. And Ethan seems willing to share information. Kale considered this, his tail tapping thoughtfully against the floor. The public gardens, neutral territory. Plenty of witnesses. Security monitoring. Exactly, Zephyr said. Safe environment for cultural exchange. Another long silence passed between them. I'll go, Kale finally said. But I'm bringing a ceremonial blade. Just in case. Torvin sighed, a sound like air escaping a punctured container. Very well. But if he produces any more red substances, I'm leaving. No discussion. Zephyr hid a smile. Excellent. I'll let Ethan know to expect company. The public gardens of the Interstellar Concordance Center were a marvel of xenobotanical engineering, featuring plant life from dozens of worlds arranged in harmonious displays that somehow managed not to kill each other. Zephyr arrived early, selecting a bench near a small pond filled with glowing water from a moon of xylos. Ethan was already there when Kale and Torvin arrived, fashionably late, as always. He sat on a blanket spread across the grass, surrounded by several containers that emitted a variety of intriguing aromas. He wore simple civilian clothing rather than his ambassadorial uniform, and he smiled when he saw them approaching. Welcome. Glad you could make it, Ethan called out, waving them over. I come bearing peace offerings in the form of Earth cuisine. Kale and Torvin approached cautiously, their eyes scanning the containers as if they might contain explosive devices. Nothing red, I promise, Ethan said with a grin, apparently guessing the source of their concern. Though I did bring some ketchup for those who want to try it. Zephyr sat on the blanket, while his friends maintained a respectful distance, standing rather than sitting. I'm not sure our digestive systems can handle Earth food, Kale said, his tone guarded. That's why I brought the food synthesizer codes, Ethan replied, tapping a small device. Everything here has been adjusted to be compatible with Sylvan, Vexian, and Zorasian biology. Same flavors, different molecular structure. He opened one container, revealing what looked like small golden sticks. These are called French fries. Crispy on the outside, soft on the inside. Classic Earth comfort food. He offered the container to Zephyr first, who took one of the sticks and examined it before taking a cautious bite. His eyes widened in surprise. That's quite good, Zephyr said. Savory but not overwhelming. Encouraged, Kale stepped closer and took one as well. After a moment's hesitation, he consumed it. Acceptable texture. Unexpectedly pleasing flavor profile. Torvin watched them both before finally approaching and selecting a fry with delicate precision. All 12 of his eyes focused on the food as he consumed it. The chemical composition is indeed compatible with Zorasian physiology. The flavor is novel. Ethan beamed. Great. Now try this. He opened another container, revealing what looked like small round pieces of meat covered in a red sauce. Kale immediately took a step back. You said nothing red. This is different, Ethan said quickly. It's called sweet and sour chicken. The red comes from pineapple and vinegar, not blood or anything scary. Here. He took a piece and ate it himself to demonstrate its safety. Still skeptical, Zephyr tried one next. The combination of sweet and tangy flavors is unusual but not unpleasant. Kale and Torvin followed suit, their expressions gradually relaxing as they realized the food posed no threat. As they ate, Ethan began to talk about Earth and human culture, carefully avoiding details that might further alarm his guests. He spoke of music, art, sports, and other aspects of human life that had parallels in their own societies. Humans seem to place great value on competition, Kale noted, observing a holographic display Ethan had brought showing some kind of athletic event. We do, Ethan agreed. Competition helped us survive and evolve on our world. We channel it into constructive activities now, mostly. Mostly? Torvin asked, his eyes narrowing. Ethan laughed. Well, we haven't completely eliminated our competitive nature. We just try to direct it in ways that don't involve killing each other. Most of the time. Zephyr noticed the careful wording but decided not to press the issue. What about your generalist nature? Is that common among Earth species? Not to the same extent, Ethan replied. Most species on Earth have specialized to fill particular ecological niches. Humans are unusual in that we never really specialized. We remain generalists, omnivores who could adapt to nearly any environment. How did that evolve? Kale asked, genuinely curious. On most Deathworlds, species either become hyper-specialized to survive specific threats or they develop formidable natural defenses. Ethan leaned back on his elbows, considering the question. That's the million-credit question, isn't it? The leading theory is that early humans were migratory. We didn't stay in one environment long enough to specialize. We had to be able to eat whatever was available, withstand whatever climate we encountered, and adapt to whatever threats presented themselves. He sat up again, his expression thoughtful. Of course, there's another theory that's gaining traction in some circles, that humans aren't originally from Earth at all. This statement captured the full attention of all three delegates. What do you mean? Zephyr asked. Well, Ethan began, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. There are some anomalies in the fossil record, gaps that don't quite fit the natural evolution narrative. And then there's the generalist nature itself. It's almost too convenient, too perfect for survival. Some researchers speculate that humans might have colonized Earth from somewhere else originally. Torvin's eyes widened. You're suggesting humans are not native to your own homeworld? I'm not suggesting anything, Ethan said quickly, holding up his hands. I'm just sharing a fringe theory that some humans find intriguing. The evidence is far from conclusive. But if it were true, Kale pressed, it would explain your adaptability. Your ability to consume so many different biochemistries without adverse effects. Ethan shrugged. It's an interesting thought experiment. But for now, officially, humans are from Earth. That's our story, and we're sticking to it. Zephyr couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was enjoying their reactions just a little too much, that this entire conversation was a form of entertainment for the human ambassador. Tell me about your family structure, Zephyr said, changing the subject. The briefing documents were rather vague on that topic. Ethan's expression softened. Family is important to humans. We form strong bonds with our mates and offspring, often maintaining those connections throughout our lives. Extended family too, grandparents, cousins, and so on. Monogamous pairings? Torvin asked. Mostly, Ethan replied. Though humans are diverse in their relationship structures. Some form lifelong bonds with one partner, others prefer multiple partners, some choose to remain unattached. As long as all parties consent, we generally don't judge. How fascinating, Zephyr said. On Sylvan, bonding is a lifelong commitment that can only be broken by death or formal decree from the council. On Vexia, the strongest males claim breeding rights with multiple females, Kale added. Competition is fierce. On Zorax, Torvin said, we form complex family units of up to 12 individuals, with multiple males and females sharing parental responsibilities. Ethan listened with interest. See? Every species does it differently. Humans just try not to impose one way on everyone. We value individual choice. Is that why you can form relationships with other species? Zephyr asked, thinking back to the images Ethan had shown him yesterday. Partly, Ethan acknowledged. But mostly it's because we don't see species differences as barriers to emotional connection. If the feelings are mutual and the biology works, why not? He pulled out his mobile device again, swiping to a particular image. This is my sister, Maya, with her partner. The screen showed a human woman with her arm around what Zephyr recognized as a Krellian, one of the massive armored quadrupeds from the high-gravity world of Krell. The contrast in size and anatomy was striking, yet both beings in the image appeared genuinely happy. They have 3 offspring, Ethan said proudly. Biologically impossible, of course, but they're wonderful parents to adopted Kryllian orphans. Kale stared at the image, his tail twitching thoughtfully. I knew there were interspecies relationships, but I never imagined this. Love finds a way, Ethan said with a shrug. Or friendship, or companionship, or whatever connection people are seeking. Humans are good at finding common ground. Torvin's auxiliary eyes focused on the image with particular intensity. The Kryllian Council officially discourages interspecies bonding. They consider it a threat to their cultural identity. Officially, maybe, Ethan replied. Unofficially, there are more interspecies Kryllian relationships than anyone admits. I know at least a dozen Kryllian human couples, and I'm just one ambassador. Zephyr considered this information carefully. This could be problematic. If other species learn that humans are actively encouraging relationships that go against cultural norms. We're not encouraging anything, Ethan corrected gently. We're just not discouraging it either. Humans believe in personal freedom. If 2 beings from different species want to form a bond, that's their business, not the government's. The Alliance might see it differently, Kale warned. Cultural integrity is one of our core principles. Is it? Ethan challenged. Or is cultural preservation just a way to maintain the status quo? To keep species from changing and evolving? He sat up straighter, his expression becoming more serious. Look, I understand the concern. Cultures are precious and worth preserving. But they're not meant to be static. They're living things that grow and adapt. Contact with other species inevitably changes us, all of us. The question is whether we fight that change or embrace it. Zephyr found himself nodding in agreement. The Sylvan Council has debated this extensively. Some argue for cultural purity, others for integration and evolution. And where do you stand? Ethan asked curiously. I believe adaptation is the key to survival, Zephyr said. For individuals and for cultures. The universe is constantly changing. Species that can't adapt won't survive. Torvin made a sound that might have been agreement or disagreement. It was hard to tell with Zoraxians. The Zorasian Empire has maintained its cultural identity for 10,000 cycles. We have adapted when necessary but preserved our core values. And those values include fleeing in terror from a human eating lunch? Kale teased, earning a glare from Torvin. Ethan laughed. Hey, no judgment here. I've seen things that would make a Vexian warrior run for cover. The universe is full of scary stuff. He began packing up the remaining food containers. I should get going. Cultural Exchange Committee meeting, remember? As he stood, Zephyr noticed something he hadn't before, a small pendant hanging around Ethan's neck. It was made of what looked like twisted metal, with a crystalline stone at its center that seemed to pulse with a soft light. That's an interesting piece of jewelry, Zephyr commented. Ethan's hand went to the pendant, his expression softening. It was a gift. From a phantom. Torvin's eyes widened. You're bonded with a phantom? How is that possible? They don't interact physically with other species. Not in the way you're thinking, Ethan replied. It's more of a mental and emotional connection. Phantoms communicate telepathically, you know. We've developed a method that allows humans to receive their thoughts. He touched the pendant gently. This is a focus crystal. It helps me maintain the connection. Her name is Whisper. She's been teaching me about nonlinear perception. Zephyr, Kale, and Torvin exchanged looks of astonishment. Phantoms are among the most reclusive species in the galaxy, Kale said. They rarely even communicate with other Deathworlders, let alone form bonds with newcomers. Whisper is curious, Ethan explained. She finds human consciousness fascinating. She says our minds are both chaotic and structured, which is an unusual combination. I had no idea such a connection was possible, Torvin admitted. The Zorasian Science Directorate has been studying phantoms for centuries without success. They're not fond of being studied, Ethan said with a smile. They prefer to be understood through direct experience. Whisper says most species try to analyze them instead of simply experiencing them. He shouldered his bag. I really do need to go. It was good seeing you all again. I hope we can do this again soon. I'd like that, Zephyr said sincerely. And I think my friends would too. Kale nodded slowly. The food was acceptable. And the conversation, enlightening. Torvin's eyes swiveled to focus on Ethan. Your perspective on interspecies relationships is unconventional. But not without merit. I will consider what you've said. Ethan grinned. That's all I can ask. Have a good day, everyone. As he walked away, the three delegates watched in silence. He's either the most dangerous being in the galaxy or the most innovative diplomat I've ever met, Kale finally said. Perhaps both, Zephyr replied. And I think we've only scratched the surface of what humans are capable of. Torvin was still staring in the direction Ethan had gone. A human phantom bond. If that's possible, what else might humans achieve that we consider impossible? The question hung in the air, unanswered but deeply unsettling. As they made their way back to the council chambers, each delegate was lost in thought, contemplating the implications of their encounter with the human ambassador. Zephyr couldn't shake the feeling that their understanding of the galaxy, and humanity's place in it, had been fundamentally altered. And he suspected this was just the beginning of a much larger revelation about the species called humans. In the weeks that followed, the delegates found themselves increasingly drawn into the human orbit. Ethan had a way of making connections that seemed both effortless and profound. He remembered personal details about each delegate, referencing them in casual conversation, making each feel seen and valued as individuals rather than just representatives of their species. The human delegation grew from a single ambassador to a team of 5 specialists, each bringing their own perspective to the council. There was Dr. Lena Petrova, a biologist who could discuss the intricacies of interspecies genetics with an enthusiasm that was contagious. There was Commander Marcus Wright, a military liaison whose understanding of tactical strategy impressed even the most hardened Vexian warriors. There was Ambassador Maya Reyes, Ethan's sister, who specialized in trade and economic development, finding opportunities for cooperation that others had missed. There was Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a xenolinguist who seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to understand and replicate the communication methods of other species. And finally, there was Jordan Chen, a cultural attaché whose knowledge of customs and traditions from across the galaxy was encyclopedic. Together, the human delegation began to influence the Deathworlder alliance in subtle but significant ways. They proposed joint research initiatives, sharing their generalist approach to problem-solving with more specialized species. They organized cultural exchanges that went beyond the formal presentations typical of such events, creating opportunities for genuine connection and understanding. Zephyr found himself working closely with Dr. Petrova on a project to develop more adaptable food synthesis systems that could safely incorporate elements from multiple Deathworld ecologies. The work was fascinating, and Zephyr was continually impressed by the human biologist's ability to see patterns and connections that specialists often missed. You Sylvans have a remarkable ability to focus on details, Dr. Petrova commented one day as they reviewed data from their latest experiment. But sometimes you miss the bigger picture because you're too close to individual elements. Whereas humans see the bigger picture but sometimes overlook critical details, Zephyr replied with a smile. We complement each other. Exactly, Dr. Petrova agreed. That's why interspecies collaboration is so valuable. Different perspectives lead to better solutions. Meanwhile, Kale found himself in frequent discussions with Commander Wright about defense strategies and threat assessment. The human commander had a way of thinking about security that was both comprehensive and flexible, incorporating elements that the Vexian military had never considered. Your people focus heavily on physical defenses, Wright noted during one of their strategy sessions. Fortifications, weapons, armor, all important, of course. But what about psychological defenses? Information warfare? Cultural resilience? Kale considered this. Vexians have always relied on our physical strength and intimidating presence. We've never needed to fight with words or ideas. Maybe not before, Wright replied. But the galaxy is changing. The greatest threats won't always be the ones you can defeat with brute force. Torvin, initially the most skeptical of the humans, found himself engaged in fascinating conversations with Dr. Tanaka about communication and consciousness. The human xenolinguist had developed a theory that all sentient languages shared certain universal elements, a concept that challenged much of established Zorasian linguistic science. The Zorasian approach has been to categorize languages by their structural differences, Torvin explained during one of their meetings. We've created taxonomies based on complexity, modality, and other parameters. But what if the differences are less important than the similarities? Dr. Tanaka countered. What if all sentient languages are attempts to express the same fundamental concepts: self, other, past, future, possibility, necessity? The methods vary, but the core concepts remain. Torvin's auxiliary eyes rotated in thought. This would require a complete reevaluation of our linguistic research. A paradigm shift. Paradigm shifts can be uncomfortable, Dr. Tanaka acknowledged. But they're often necessary for progress. As the delegates worked more closely with the human team, they began to notice changes in their own perspectives. Zephyr found himself thinking more holistically about problems, considering multiple angles simultaneously rather than focusing narrowly on the most logical solution. Kale began to appreciate the value of psychological and cultural defenses, incorporating these elements into Vexian security protocols. Torvin even started to question some of the rigid categorizations that had defined Zorasian science for generations. But not everyone was pleased with these changes. Within each delegation, there were those who viewed human influence with suspicion, concerned that their species' unique identities were being diluted. The humans are too adaptable, one of Kale's military advisors complained during a Vexian council meeting. They have no fixed nature, no core identity. They absorb elements from other cultures without contributing anything of substance in return. They contribute their generalist perspective, Kale countered. Their ability to see connections that specialists miss. Or they're a cultural parasite, another advisor retorted. Taking what they want from other species and leaving behind hollowed-out versions of those cultures. Similar concerns were being raised in other delegations. The Sylvan elders questioned whether Zephyr's collaboration with Dr. Petrova was compromising Sylvan scientific methods. The Zorasian High Council expressed concern about Torvin's interest in human linguistic theories, which they saw as a threat to established Zorasian scholarship. The tensions came to a head during a special session of the Deathworlder Alliance called to address growing concerns about human influence. The humans have been members of this council for less than 3 cycles, said the Krellian ambassador, a massive armored quadruped whose voice rumbled through the chamber. Yet already we see their influence spreading through our cultures like an invasive species. Let's be fair, Ethan responded calmly from his seat. We've shared our knowledge and perspectives, just as every member species does. That's the purpose of this alliance. The difference, the Krellian ambassador retorted, is that humans don't have a culture of their own to share. You're a collection of borrowed elements, a mosaic with no original design. This statement caused a stir in the chamber. Many delegates nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable. That's not true, Maya Reyes said, speaking for the first time during the session. Humans have a rich cultural heritage spanning thousands of years. Art, music, literature, philosophy. Much of it borrowed from other cultures, the Krellian ambassador countered. And what is distinctly human? What is your core identity? Ethan stood, addressing the chamber. Our core identity is adaptation. It's true that we borrow from other cultures, we're not ashamed of that. We see value in diversity, in incorporating different perspectives into our own understanding. But we don't just borrow, we synthesize. We take elements from various sources and create something new, something uniquely human. He paused, looking around the chamber. The question isn't whether humans have a culture of our own. The question is whether you can see past your own definitions of culture to recognize ours. The chamber fell silent for a moment, processing this statement. Humans are a threat to cultural purity, the Vexian ambassador, Kale's superior, declared. The generalist nature dilutes the specialized adaptations that have allowed our species to survive on hostile worlds. Or it enhances them, Zephyr found himself saying, standing to address the chamber. I've worked closely with Dr. Petrova on food synthesis systems. Her human perspective has helped us develop solutions that Sylvan specialists might never have considered. She doesn't dilute our methods, she expands them. The same is true in security, Kale added, rising beside Zephyr. Commander Wright's understanding of psychological and cultural defenses has strengthened Vexian security protocols, not weakened them. Torvin stood as well. Dr. Tanaka's theories on universal linguistic elements don't replace Zorasian science, they complement it, offering new avenues for research and understanding. The three delegates stood together, a united front in support of their human colleagues. The humans are not a threat to our cultures, Zephyr continued. They're an opportunity for growth, for evolution. The universe is changing, and species that can't adapt will be left behind. We're not asking anyone to abandon their cultural identity, Ethan added. We're suggesting that identity doesn't have to be static. It can grow, evolve, incorporate new elements without losing its essential nature. The debate continued for hours, with passionate arguments on both sides. By the end of the session, no consensus had been reached, but something fundamental had shifted. The opposition to human influence remained, but it was no longer unchallenged. The delegates who had worked closely with humans had spoken up in their defense, offering concrete examples of how collaboration had benefited their species. As the session concluded, Ethan approached Zephyr, Kale, and Torvin. Thank you, he said simply. You didn't have to do that. Of course we did, Zephyr replied. You've been good allies to us. It was time we returned the favor. The alliance is stronger with diversity, Kale added. Including human diversity. Torvin's eyes swiveled to focus on Ethan. Your perspective has value. That doesn't diminish the value of other perspectives. Ethan smiled. Well said. All of you. He looked around the chamber, where delegates were still gathered in small groups, discussing the session. This won't be the end of the resistance, Ethan noted. Change is always threatening to some. But it's inevitable, Zephyr replied. And humans, of all species, should understand that. Ethan laughed. We do. Better than most. In the cycles that followed, the relationship between humans and other Deathworlder species continued to evolve. There were setbacks and conflicts, misunderstandings and disagreements, but there was also progress, slow, steady, and transformative. The joint research projects initiated by Dr. Petrova and Zephyr led to breakthroughs in food synthesis technology that benefited species across the galaxy. The security protocols developed by Commander Wright and Kale were adopted by multiple delegations, improving safety for all Deathworlder representatives. The linguistic theories proposed by Dr. Tanaka and explored by Torvin opened new avenues of communication between species that had previously struggled to understand each other. Perhaps most significantly, the number of interspecies relationships began to increase, not just involving humans, but between various Deathworlder species as well. The example set by humans, who refused to see species differences as barriers to connection, inspired others to look beyond their traditional boundaries. Zephyr often found himself reflecting on how much had changed since that first encounter in the food court, when he and his friends had fled in terror from a human eating synthesized meat with ketchup. Now, he counted humans among his closest allies, respected colleagues whose perspectives had enriched his own understanding of the universe. One evening, as he watched the sunset from the observation deck of the Concordance Center, a human tradition he had adopted, Zephyr was joined by Ethan. "Penny for your thoughts?" Ethan asked, using a human idiom that Zephyr had learned meant, "What are you thinking about?" "Just reflecting on how much has changed," Zephyr replied. "Since we first met?" Ethan smiled. "You mean since I terrified your friends with my Deathworld predator platter?" "Among other things," Zephyr said with a laugh. Do you remember what you told me that day? About humans being generalists? Of course, Ethan replied. It's kind of our thing. I've been thinking about that, Zephyr said. About what it really means. I used to think it was about adaptability, about being able to survive in different conditions, eat different foods, communicate with different species. And now? Now I think it's about something deeper, Zephyr continued. It's about not being bound by rigid definitions of identity. About being able to incorporate new elements without losing your essential nature. About seeing connections where others see divisions. Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering this. That's a beautiful way to put it. I think you understand humans better than most humans understand themselves. I've had good teachers, Zephyr replied. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon. You know, Ethan said finally, when humans first ventured into space, we were afraid of what we might find. We thought we might encounter species so advanced, so powerful, that we would be insignificant by comparison. And did you? Zephyr asked. We did, Ethan replied. We encountered species with abilities that surpassed ours in every measurable way. Species that could live for millennia, communicate telepathically across vast distances, manipulate matter with their minds, survive in conditions that would kill humans instantly. Yet you're not insignificant, Zephyr noted. No, Ethan agreed. Because we brought something different to the table. Not power or longevity or specialized abilities, but adaptability. Not superiority, but compatibility. Not dominance, but connection. He turned to face Zephyr. That's our gift to the galaxy, I think. The ability to bridge differences, to find common ground, to create harmony from diversity. Is that why humans can form bonds with so many different species? Zephyr asked. Even those considered incompatible? Partly, Ethan acknowledged. But I think it's also because we don't just see other species as other. We see them as potential extensions of ourselves, as opportunities to grow and expand what it means to be human. He touched the pendant around his neck, the focus crystal that connected him to Whisper, the Phantom. Every bond one form, every connection I make, changes me in some small way, Ethan continued. Adds to my understanding of the universe. After a while, the boundaries between human and other begin to blur. Not because I'm losing my identity, but because I'm expanding it. Zephyr considered this, thinking about his own evolving identity. I think I understand what you mean. Working with Dr. Petrova has changed how I approach problems. My friendship with you and your team has changed how I see other species. I'm still Sylvan, but I'm a different kind of Sylvan than I was. His gaze still on the stars. Working with Dr. Petrova has changed how I approach problems. My friendship with you and your team has changed how I see other species. I'm still Sylvan, but I'm a different kind of Sylvan than I was when we first met. Ethan smiled, a warm, genuine expression that Zephyr had come to associate with humanity's most endearing quality, its sincere hopefulness. That's the thing about identity, Ethan said. It's not a fortress to be defended, but a garden to be cultivated. You can add new plants without destroying the garden. This philosophical conversation, so common in their interactions now, was interrupted by a shrill alert from Ethan's communication device. His expression shifted instantly from relaxed to focused. That's the emergency channel. All delegates to the council chamber. Immediately. The sense of peace shattered, replaced by a familiar tension. They moved quickly through the corridors, joining the stream of representatives rushing toward the main council hall. The atmosphere was thick with apprehension. When they arrived, the central holographic display was already active, showing a grim-faced Krellian commander. We've lost contact with 3 more colonies, the commander rumbled, his voice heavy with concern. Outpost Zeta on Xylos, the mining facility on Cygnus X1, and the research station on the edge of the Void Nebula. All went silent within the same cycle. No distress calls, no signs of struggle. Just silence. A murmur of alarm spread through the chamber. These weren't just any colonies, they were frontier outposts, populated by some of the hardiest Deathworlder species. For them to go dark without a fight was unprecedented. We sent a reconnaissance vessel, the commander continued. It found no structural damage, no signs of attack. But the inhabitants, they were just stopped. Some were frozen in place, others huddled in corners, exhibiting extreme paranoia. They wouldn't respond to communication. When the crew tried to make physical contact, the colonists reacted with mindless terror, attacking anything that moved. The implications were chilling. This wasn't a military assault. It was something else, something far more insidious. What kind of weapon could do this? Kale asked, his voice low and dangerous. That's just it, the commander replied. We can't find any evidence of a weapon. No radiation, no chemical agents, no biological pathogens. It's as if their will to live, their ability to trust, has been erased. Over the next few cycles, the phenomenon, dubbed the Silent Plague, spread. More outposts fell silent. Panic began to ripple through the alliance. The isolationist faction, led by the Kryllian ambassador, found new voice. This is a consequence of our entanglement, the Kryllian ambassador declared in a heated session. By mingling our cultures, our species, we have created a vulnerability. This plague preys on the unnatural connections we have forged. His words found fertile ground. Fear was a powerful force, and the Silent Plague was its ultimate expression. Delegates began to withdraw, canceling joint projects, restricting their people's movements. The very fabric of the alliance was beginning to unravel. The human delegation worked tirelessly with their allies to find a solution. Dr. Petrova analyzed every piece of data but found no biological cause. Commander Wright modeled every military scenario but found no enemy to fight. Dr. Tanaka tried to establish communication with the afflicted, but his linguistic skills were useless against a wall of pure, irrational terror. It's not a physical threat, Ethan concluded during a late-night strategy session with Zephyr, Kale, and Torvin. It's psychological. It's mimetic. It's an idea that infects the mind, amplifying every instinct for self-preservation until it becomes self-destruction. Then how do we fight an idea? Kale asked in frustration. I can't shoot a concept. I can't stab a fear. Maybe you don't fight it, Zephyr said slowly, his mind working through the problem. Maybe you have to replace it. Torvin's auxiliary eyes swiveled to focus on Zephyr. Replace it? With what? With a stronger idea, Zephyr replied, looking at Ethan. With the same thing that has been changing all of us. Connection. Ethan's eyes lit up with understanding. The plague amplifies division, fear of the other. So the cure has to amplify unity. It has to be a signal that's more powerful than the signal of fear. The idea was radical, almost insane. But as they discussed it, it began to take shape. They called it the resonance cascade. The plan was to create a broadcast, a coordinated signal that would combine elements from every member species of the Alliance. Not just their languages or their music, but deeper things, the mathematical patterns that underpinned Zorasian philosophy, the strategic harmonies of Vexian war chants, the intricate growth patterns of Sylvan biology, the gravitational resonances of Kryllian homeworlds, and dozens more. The goal was to create a symphony of shared existence, a broadcast that would say, we are all different, and we are all one. It was a message of unity so profound, they hoped, that it could overwhelm the plague's message of isolation. Getting the Alliance to agree was a battle in itself. The isolationists were vehemently opposed. You want to broadcast the core of our cultures into the void, the Kryllian ambassador roared. To share our most sacred concepts with our enemies? This is madness. It's the only way, Ethan countered, his voice calm but firm in the face of the Council's hostility. The plague doesn't distinguish between friend and foe. It is an enemy to all sentient life. We either face it together or we perish separately. It was Zephyr who finally tipped the balance. He stood before the council, his small frame a stark contrast to the towering delegates around him. For cycles, we have defined ourselves by our differences, he began, his sylvan voice clear and precise. We are Vexians, strong and proud. We are Zoraxians, logical and ancient. We are Sylvans, patient and wise. These identities have served us well. They allowed us to survive on worlds determined to kill us. He paused, making eye contact with delegates from across the chamber. But survival is no longer enough. The universe is changing. The threats we now face are not things we can simply outmuscle or outthink on our own. The silent plague is the ultimate proof of this. It targets our greatest strength, our specialized survival instincts, and turns it into our greatest weakness. Humanity has shown us another way, Zephyr continued, gesturing to Ethan and his team. Not to abandon our identities, but to expand them. To see our differences not as walls, but as notes in a larger composition. The resonance cascade is not about erasing our cultures, it is about weaving them into something stronger, something that can face this new darkness. His words resonated. The delegates who had worked closely with humans, who had experienced the benefits of collaboration firsthand, spoke up in support. One by one, they agreed to contribute. The plan was approved. The execution required a level of cooperation never before seen in the galaxy. Kale provided a modified Vexian battle chant, stripping it of its aggression and transforming it into a rhythm of solidarity. Torvin translated a complex Zorasian proof of universal interconnectedness into a pure mathematical frequency that could be felt as much as heard. Zephyr designed the overall structure of the cascade, using his sylvan understanding of complex systems to weave the disparate elements into a coherent whole. The humans acted as the conductors of this cosmic orchestra. Ethan coordinated the effort, Dr. Tanaka ensured the compatibility of the communication protocols, Maya organized the resource distribution, Commander Wright handled the security of the broadcast array, and Dr. Petrova monitored the biological and psychological effects. From the heart of the Concordance Center, they broadcast the resonance cascade on every known frequency, aiming it at the afflicted worlds and beyond. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, reports began to trickle in. From Outpost Zeta, a single, tentative message came through, a Zorasian researcher, humming the mathematical frequency of the cascade. From Cygnus X1, a group of Vexian miners, beating out the rhythm of the new chant on their equipment. One by one, the afflicted colonies began to awaken. The plague didn't disappear, but it receded, pushed back by the overwhelming signal of unity. It had no power over minds that were open to connection, that saw the other not as a threat, but as part of themselves. In the cycles that followed, the Deathworlder alliance was forever changed. The old rivalries and suspicions didn't vanish entirely, but they were overshadowed by a new understanding. The Krillian ambassador, once the staunchest opponent of integration, publicly acknowledged that the harmony of many voices is stronger than the roar of one. The story came full circle one evening in the food court. It was bustling, more vibrant and diverse than ever. Zephyr sat at a large table with Kale and Torvin. Ethan and his team were with them, along with delegates from a dozen other species. On the table was a feast, a true friendship platter that combined dishes from across the galaxy. Kale was enthusiastically explaining the tactical advantages of a sylvan root vegetable to a skeptical phantom. Torvin was engaged in a lively debate with a Krillian about the aesthetics of crystalline structures. Zephyr watched them all, a feeling of deep contentment settling over him. Ethan passed him a plate with a strange, lumpy red vegetable. "Try this. It's a tomato. The original source of ketchup." Zephyr took a bite. The flavor was bright, tangy, and sweet. "It's wonderful," he said. "Very friendly shaped." Ethan laughed, the same warm, genuine sound from that first day in the food court. But now, it wasn't the sound of an ambassador trying to fit in. It was the sound of a friend, sharing a meal with his family. The galaxy was still full of wonders and terrors, but as Zephyr looked around the table, at the tapestry of species brought together by choice and necessity, he knew they had found something that was somehow both at once. A future, built not on the fear of differences, but on the strength of their connection.